Illyra Voss had always believed that love was supposed to feel like coming home. Instead, it felt like standing in the middle of a crowded hall, while every eye in the room watched her heart break in real time. It happened on a cold evening in the great hall of the Blackthorn Pack, where the fires burned bright, and the wolves gathered to celebrate the naming of their next heir. Illyra stood at the center of the room, her hand trembling as she waited for Alpha Kale Blackthorn to speak the words that would bind them forever. She had waited 3 years for this moment, ever since the night her wolf had first caught his scent, and known, without doubt, that he was meant to be hers. But Kale did not speak the words of acceptance. Instead, he looked at her the way a man looks at something he has already decided to throw away. "I reject you," he said, his voice carrying easily across the silent hall. "You are not fit to stand beside me. You are not fit to carry my bloodline." The words landed like physical blows. Illyra felt her knees weaken, felt the collective gasp of the pack around her, felt the humiliation crawl up her spine and settle behind her eyes. She did not cry, not there, not in front of them. She had too much pride left for that, even as everything else was stripped away. She turned and walked out of the hall, her back straight, her steps steady. Even though inside, she was shattering into pieces, she was certain she would never fully gather again. That night, Illyra did not return to her chambers. She did not say goodbye to the few friends she had made within the pack. She simply changed into traveling clothes, took what little money she had saved, and disappeared into the forest that bordered Blackthorn land. She did not look back. She could not afford to. If she looked back, she was afraid she would return, and if she returned, she was afraid she would spend the rest of her life waiting for a man who had already decided she was not worth wanting. The forest was unforgiving that first winter. Illyra learned to hunt small game with a knife she barely knew how to use. She learned which berries would keep her alive and which would kill her. She learned to sleep with one eye open and to move before the sun rose, always putting more distance between herself and the pack that had cast her aside. Slowly, painfully, she became someone new. The girl who had begged for a place in Kale's heart was gone. In her place stood a woman who trusted no one but herself. By the time 3 years had passed, Illyra had made her way into the kingdom of Thornvale, a human and shifter territory that had long been rivals with the Blackthorn Pack. She had taken a new name, Lyra Ashen, and found work as a healer's assistant in the capital city. She kept her head down. She did not seek attention. She wanted nothing more than a quiet life, far from packs and alphas, and the particular kind of pain that came from loving someone who did not love you back. Fate, however, was not finished with her. The old queen of Thornvale, a woman named Seraphine who had ruled with wisdom for 4 decades, fell gravely ill during the coldest month of winter. She had no children, no named heir, and a council of nobles who were already circling like vultures, each one plotting to seize the throne for themselves. In her final days, Queen Seraphine called for the healer who had been tending to her, and by chance, it was Illyra who answered the summons, since her mentor had fallen ill herself. The dying queen looked at Illyra for a long moment, studying her face, as though searching for something. "You have kind eyes," Seraphine said, her voice weak but steady, "and a spine of iron beneath them. I have watched you these past weeks. You do not flatter me. You do not seek favor. That is rare in this castle." Illyra did not know what to say, so she said nothing, simply continued her work of easing the queen's pain. "I have no heir," Seraphine continued, "and I will not hand my kingdom to wolves who would tear it apart within a year fighting over the pieces. I have made my decision. Before I die, I will name you as my successor." Illyra nearly dropped the cup of medicine in her hands. "Your Majesty, I am no one. I am not even from Thornvale." "You are exactly what Thornvale needs," Seraphine said. "Someone who owes nothing to the nobles who would sell this kingdom for their own gain. Someone who has already survived losing everything and came out the other side still standing. That is the mark of a true ruler, child. Not birthright, character." 3 days later, Queen Seraphine passed in her sleep, and true to her word, a sealed decree was read before the entire court, naming Lyra Ashen as the rightful heir to the throne of Thornvale. The nobles protested, of course, but the queen's decree was binding by ancient law, and the royal guard, loyal to Seraphine until the end, made certain the transition of power was honored. Illyra found herself standing in the throne room days later, a crown resting on her head that felt impossibly heavy, wearing robes that did not belong to the woman who had once fled through a forest with nothing but a knife and a broken heart. She had not asked for this. She had not planned for this. And yet here she was, a queen in a kingdom that was not her own, wearing a crown that belonged to people who were, by blood and history, enemies of the pack that had once cast her out. She told herself she would rule quietly. She would keep the peace. She would not draw attention to herself, and in time, perhaps the ache in her chest would finally fade. That plan lasted exactly 6 weeks. It ended the day King Draven Ashworth arrived at the gates of Thornvale, seeking an audience with the new monarch to discuss a border treaty between his territory and hers. Draven was not a man easily rattled. He was the alpha king of the Ashworth Wolves, a leader known across every territory for his discipline, his fairness, and the quiet strength that made even seasoned warriors lower their eyes when he entered a room. He had ruled for nearly a decade without ever finding his mate, and he had long since stopped expecting to. Some alphas were simply meant to rule alone, he had told himself. He had made peace with that thought. That peace shattered the moment he stepped into the throne room of Thornvale and caught her scent. It hit him like a wave, unmistakable, undeniable, the scent that every wolf spent their whole life hoping to find. His wolf surged forward inside him, a low growl building in his chest before he could stop it. He looked up at the woman seated on the throne, crowned in gold, dressed in the deep green of Thornvale royalty, and he knew instantly, without a single doubt, that he was looking at his mate. Illyra felt it too. The moment his eyes met hers, something inside her chest twisted painfully, a recognition she had never expected to feel again after Kale's rejection. Her wolf, long silent and guarded, stirred awake for the first time in years, straining toward the stranger standing before her throne. She hated it instantly. She hated the way her heart raced, the way her breath caught, the way 3 years of carefully built walls seemed to crack in a single moment. She had sworn she would never let herself feel that pull again, not after what it had cost her the last time. "You are not what I expected," Draven said, his voice low and controlled, though she could see the effort it took him to keep it that way. "Neither are you," Illyra replied evenly, refusing to let her voice shake. "Though I imagine you did not expect to find your mate wearing the crown of a kingdom your people have quarreled with for generations." Draven's jaw tightened. "You know then." "I know what my wolf is telling me," she said. "I simply do not trust it. Wolves have been wrong before." The words carried more weight than she intended, and something flickered across Draven's face, a question he did not yet know how to ask. Over the following days, Draven remained in Thornvale, under the excuse of treaty negotiations, though both of them understood the true reason he had not yet left. He watched Illyra rule her court with a fairness that surprised him, watched her face down nobles twice her age, without flinching, watched her carry the weight of a kingdom she had never asked for, with a quiet strength that reminded him of no one he had ever met. Slowly, carefully, she began to tell him her story. Not all at once, and not easily, but in pieces, the way a person shares something they are still afraid might break them again. She told him about Kale, about the rejection, about the forest and the years of surviving on nothing but stubbornness and a refusal to let herself be broken permanently. Draven listened without interrupting, his hands clenched at his sides as the anger built in him, not at her, but for her. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "He was wrong," Draven finally said, "not just cruel, wrong. And I do not think it was only cruelty that drove him to reject you." Illyra frowned. "What do you mean?" "Kale Blackthorn has always feared losing power," Draven said slowly, piecing together something that had been nagging at him since he first heard her story. "There is an old prophecy among the northern packs, one most have forgotten, about a mate bond so powerful it could unite 2 warring kingdoms and end generations of conflict. If Kale suspected you carried that kind of bond, tying you to another alpha, an alpha he considered a rival, he would have had every reason to sever it before it could form. Rejecting you would have been the only way to stop it." The realization settled over Illyra like cold water. It had never been about her unworthiness at all. It had been about control, about Kale protecting his own position by destroying hers, before she ever understood what she was capable of becoming. The anger that rose in her was not the same raw pain she had carried for 3 years. This was clearer, sharper. It was the anger of someone who finally understood the truth and refused to be diminished by it any longer. "I will not be his victim," she said quietly. "Not anymore." "You were never his victim," Draven said. "You are a queen who survived him. There is a difference." Word of Draven's extended stay in Thornvale eventually reached Cale Blackthorn, and predictably, it did not sit well with him. He arrived at the gates of Thornvale weeks later, uninvited, demanding an audience, insisting that Elira return to Blackthorn lands to answer for abandoning her pack. He found, waiting for him in the throne room, not the broken young woman he had cast aside 3 years earlier, but a queen, crowned, composed, flanked by a royal guard loyal only to her, and standing beside an alpha king whose reputation alone was enough to make lesser wolves reconsider their approach. "You have no claim over me," Elira said, her voice steady and cold. "You made certain of that yourself, in front of your entire pack. I owe you nothing, not loyalty, not explanation, not my presence." Cale's eyes flicked to Draven, understanding dawning slowly and bitterly across his face. "You knew," he said. "You knew what she was." "I know what she is now," Draven replied calmly. "A queen who rules with more integrity than you have ever shown. Whatever games you played to protect your position, they failed. She rose without you. She rose despite you." Cale left Thornvale that day with nothing, his plans undone by the very rejection he had thought would secure his power. In the months that followed, Elira and Draven built something neither of them had expected to find again after years of disappointment and loss. Draven did not ask her to abandon her throne or fold her kingdom into his territory. Instead, he proposed an alliance between Ashworth and Thornvale, 2 kingdoms once divided by old grudges, now bound together by something far stronger than treaties. Elira accepted the mate bond, not because fate demanded it, but because she chose it, on her own terms, as a queen, and not as someone begging to be wanted. She kept her crown, she kept her name, she kept the strength she had built for herself in the years she spent surviving alone. And when she finally stood beside Draven, wearing the crown that had once belonged to her enemies, she understood something she had not understood on the night Cale rejected her. Being unwanted by the wrong person was never the end of her story. It was simply the door that led her toward the life she was always meant to have, one she built with her own hands, and finally, one she was allowed to share.